Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to get started in just a few minutes here. We're just going to give everyone a little bit more time to join before we get started.
Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us. I think we're ready to get started. Anna, you think we're good to go?
Yeah,
Okay,
I think it's just about 1:30, so we can go ahead and get started.
perfect. Well, again, thank you everybody for being here and joining us today. I'm Steve Willits, and I'm the founder of Willits Technologies. I've been working with small businesses for more than 30 years to help them optimize their IT needs. We are a family-owned business that work closely with our clients to really be a strategic partner and help our customers get the most out of their IT needs. Today, we're going to talk about something that's a real common, a real major issue for many small businesses, and that is migrating to the cloud. So we're going to talk about cloud migration made easy and what you need to know to make it as easy as possible. So we will have a Q&A session at the end of this, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Go ahead and post any questions you have into the Q&A section or even into the chat while we go through, and I'll make sure I answer everything at the end. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started and talk about cloud migrations. And when we talk about cloud migration, we really start with two key questions. The first is, why are you moving to the cloud? And the second is, how do you do it? So we'll start with the why. And really the two biggest drivers by far of moving to the cloud are working from anywhere or work from home and remote workers, and the ability to reduce vulnerability to local disasters. And we're here in Houston, so obviously that's a really major issue for us. So those are the biggest drivers for sure. But there are other real benefits of moving to the cloud, and some of them are things like scalability. Being in the cloud, and when we talk about moving to the cloud, one thing I like to kind of back up and just mention what the cloud is. And the cloud is really just the internet. So when we talk about moving to the cloud, we're talking about moving our systems from being on a local network in an office to being run on the internet, basically. And one of the nice things about that is it gives us scalability, which is one of the other benefits of moving to the cloud. It's when you're locked in with equipment in your local network, servers or any other equipment that you have, very hard to scale up if you need to without spending a lot of money, and even scaling down can be difficult if needed. So working in the cloud can give you a lot of flexibility on that regard. You also get a lot of flexibility with the devices that you run. So kind of running traditional apps on a traditional network, pretty much locked in with fairly high-powered Windows computers. Moving to the cloud, you may have a lot more flexibility on what those devices are, maybe not even Windows computers potentially. And then another common benefit of moving to the cloud is reducing hardware and software costs. And it's tough because there's kind of a trade-off here. You incur some costs of moving to the cloud because you got to pay for the infrastructure somehow, but you also get to remove a lot of that, all those servers and the equipment that you had, and sometimes can be very expensive equipment to run your apps internally in a local network. That really disappears. And so, and along with that, the support costs for that equipment disappear too. So you can actually have some real cost savings in going to the cloud as well. And ultimately, this all comes down to competitive advantage. And that's what we're all looking for in our businesses, right? Is some way to distinguish us from our competition, and having the ability to be up when others are down, and being able to hire people from anywhere, and be flexible on how people work, and the scalability and all these things, they come to giving you an advantage over your customers. Or if you don't do it, potentially a disadvantage amongst in your industry as well. So there's lots of good reasons for moving to the cloud. Let's talk then about what you need to do to be ready for it. And before we start talking about how to move to the cloud, we really want to understand why and what. And so that first piece that we just talked about with what's the reason you're going there? What benefits are you trying to achieve? Really knowing what that is may have an impact on how you go and do it. The other two big pieces are understanding your software and understanding your data. And these are the real drivers, especially your software. What software do you rely on daily? The key stuff that you run your business on that you can't do without. What is that software, and where is it? Is it running locally on your network? Is it installed on your servers or on your PCs, or is it web-based and running off the cloud already? So kind of do an inventory. You really need to do an inventory of your software and identify what the key software is. And if you have local software, is there a web alternative for it? So understanding your software is the first piece, and that's really going to be a major driver on how you go about it. The next big piece is understanding your data. Where is your data? And for some companies, that's really simple. You've got a server with a share on it, and all your data is in that share. That's great. A lot of other companies, it's more complex. You might have a server with a share. You might have some on local computers. You might have some users that have their own, Dropbox or local cloud storage that they have things in and have kind of data all over the place. And you really need to identify what that is, because how much data you have is a big piece of the puzzle and what you're going to do when you go to the cloud. So knowing how much data there is, if a business with 500 gigabytes of data that has to be moved to the cloud is very different than one with 4 terabytes of data. And how that data is structured and the permissions associated with it. Do you have a nice simple hierarchical folder structure on a server, or do you have, or is it really more destructured, just kind of lots of files and lots of folders everywhere? And do you have lots of sub permissions on subfolders and things? And so these are all things that you need to know, because we'll have a very big impact. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the next slides here. But assessing your needs is critical before we choose on how to move to the cloud. So let's talk about that. How do we move to the cloud? What's the right cloud model is really the first starting point. And there's three major cloud models out there. There's public cloud, private cloud, and hybrid. We're really going to focus on the public cloud, because for small businesses, when we talk about going to cloud, that's really what we're talking about. The public cloud is using public cloud services. This means web-based software, cloud services like SharePoint or Google Drive, infrastructure services like Azure and Azure Virtual Desktop, or Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud. These are all publicly available commercial solutions that are delivered over the internet. That's the public cloud. The private cloud is much more the domain of large companies. These are people that are building these structure out themselves. That infrastructure, they're building it themselves at data centers and hosting it themselves in the cloud. And for most small businesses, it's just not realistic. It's way too expensive and way too complicated to do. And the hybrid cloud is kind of a combination of those, for the same reason that private cloud really isn't an option for small businesses. The hybrid cloud isn't either. We're going to focus on the public cloud. And even inside the public cloud, though, we got to choose the right public cloud model. So within the public cloud, we really break this down into three modes of going to the cloud: either cloud native, desktop as a service, sometimes called DaaS, or a hybrid approach of both. So we'll talk about these and what the benefits and problems are with them. We'll start with cloud native. Cloud native really just means you're using cloud-based software and services rather than locally installed solutions. Using web-based software. Good example is QuickBooks Online instead of QuickBooks Desktop. QuickBooks Desktop would be the local, computer install one. QuickBooks Online is their web version. So cloud native means you're running web versions of software. For cloud file storage, it means using things like SharePoint instead of a local file server share. And SharePoint's a really common one because it comes bundled in as part of your Microsoft 365 subscription, which you may already have. But here's where understanding your data is really important, because the size and the structure and the permissions and all that will drive what cloud file storage solution you need. If you've got a lot of data, terabytes of data, SharePoint may not be the right solution. Now, there are others out there. There's lots of others out there, and different cloud sharing file systems are different, have different benefits for different requirements. And so really understanding your data is critical for understanding which cloud file sharing system to do. And again, when we go talk about going to the cloud, these are really two big things, right? What software you're running and how are you handling your data. Those are the key. And so cloud native means we're doing those with services that are already there. And so let's talk about the benefits and pros and cons of going cloud native. It's by far the easiest and probably the least expensive. Very flexible. Because you're using services that are already there. You may probably already using some cloud native apps. Almost everybody is at this point. It's very inexpensive because of that. There's no real infrastructure that you have to build out to be able to support it, or pay for it to be able to support it. And those two things really make it very flexible. You can work from anywhere. You can be very flexible in how your computers are configured. So it's really the quick and easy way to get into the cloud. So what's the downside of this? Because it sounds great, and it is, but there is a problem with it. And that is that piece on your software, where I said your software is really the linchpin on this whole thing. And that's really the key. If there's a cloud native version of your software you can use, great, fantastic, go cloud native. If there's not, cloud native doesn't work for you. If you have that server installed app, or that app that really has to run locally on your network, You can't put that in a cloud native model. You're going to have to use a different solution for that. We'll talk. That's where we're going to get into desktop as a service. But there are some other downsides to cloud native. It does require you to get really good endpoint security, and this isn't so much a negative. It's just really a different from what you may be doing. We've built networks out for years now to be really secure, and you've got firewalls and all kinds of cool network security tools, and in cloud native, that network kind of disappears and everything's pushed out to the endpoint. So your computers may not be in the office anymore. You may have people working from home, working from a coffee shop, working in other countries even. And so we have to take that security. All that security is still really critical, but you may have to change what tools you're using to provide that security. And there's ways to do that. You can make cloud native very secure, but it may be a different kind of security model than what you're used to. And that all stems from that decentralized management where you don't have it all contained in a little network anymore. The only other thing that's a potential con to cloud native compared to some of the other cloud solutions is it may require a little better computers. You're still running the software on the machines. Ultimately, even if it's web-based, it's executing on your computer. So you're going to have computers that are kind of similar to the traditional office computers you're likely to have had. But again, the cloud native is the easiest, it's least expensive if you can do it. So let's talk about if you don't go cloud native, your next option is desktop as a service, or DaaS. And I put remote control there in parentheses because really that's what this is. This is remote control. And if any of you use remote control tools, a lot of people have for remotely accessing computers, that sort of thing. Desktop as a service is really remote control, but it's like on steroids. It's a lot better. It runs better. It's a smoother transition. It has a lot more capabilities, but it's the same kind of concept. You take that local network you had, your servers, your computers, and you put them in a cloud-hosted infrastructure environment. And so you have all your servers and desktops, they're just hosted in the cloud now. And you access those cloud desktops via remote control from any device. And I mean really any device. You can use Windows computers, old Windows computers, new Windows computers, non-Windows computers, Chromebooks, Macs. Heck, you can use your phone if you want. It might be a little bit of a small screen to read, but you can actually connect to a desktop as a service environment with a phone. I mean, it's the ultimate in device flexibility at the very least. The two big names in desktop as a service are Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services. And for small businesses, we're really talking about Microsoft Azure and Azure Virtual Desktop. Amazon Web Services, or AWS, it's out there. AWS is huge, but really most of the people that use AWS are the software companies. QuickBooks Online is actually hosted in AWS. So really large software companies are using AWS the most. It's not widely used by small businesses for desktop, replacing desktops in the cloud. They do have functionality for that. I've never actually seen a small business use it, but it's out there. Microsoft Azure is by far the biggest, most common solution for this. You can really kind of duplicate your local network experience with your servers and your desktops with Azure Virtual Desktop. And so this is, again, the real driver here is probably what your software is. And so let's talk about kind of the pros and cons of desktop as a service. The pros, really the biggest one by far is that you can run that software that's not web-based. If it's not cloud native, well, in desktop as a service, you can still run it because you're still going to run it on a Windows server. You're still going to access it from a Windows PC connected to that Windows server. So it's, for the software standpoint, it doesn't know it's running in the cloud for the most part. So that's by far the most common reason for the common benefit of desktop as a service. But there are some others. It's easier to secure a DaaS environment because it's this kind of self-contained thing. It's really easy to lock down and put real tight security on it. It's got that centralized management is part of why that is. So it's got very centralized management. You can load software once and it's available for everybody kind of thing. So there are some other advantages, and of course the ability to use any device, including older and slower computers and really even phones and that sort of thing. So you have ultimate flexibility on the devices. So there are some downsides to desktop as a service. It sounds great, but there are some drawbacks to it. By far, the first and foremost is cost and complexity. You got to pay for that network infrastructure in the cloud, Amazon Web Services or Azure Virtual Desktop. You got to pay for those services, and they're complex configurations. It's not, you have all that same complexity of your own network with servers and configuring traffic and all these things, and now you have the extra layer of having to manage that cloud infrastructure as well. So really is a much more complicated animal to put together. Additional cons are there can be occasional compatibility issues. There is some some of that older software does have a problem running in desktop as a service, and all the desktop as a service solutions run on some version of Windows, and some of that software can detect that it's a cloud hosted version. And this is really rare nowadays, but it still can happen. It used to be a much bigger problem than it is, but you still need to just double check with your software, make sure that, hey, that network software I'm using is supported and running in Azure virtual in an AVD kind of environment or hosted environment. The other things involved around downsides to desktop as a service are things dealing with local devices, printers, scanners. Because you're doing remote control, you're not actually, the computer doing the work doesn't have direct connectivity to your printer or to your scanner. Those things are connected to the device you're using as a go-between, right? Your printer is connected to your device. Your device is doing remote control of another computer. That computer you're controlling can't see that printer. And so it has to pass through, and there's some complexities around that. More often than not, we try and solve this problem by using network printers and network scanners and setting up VPNs and some things. And so there's usually ways to work around this, but there may be printers you can't use. You probably can't go buy an off-the-shelf cheap printer from a store and have it work well in a desktop as a service environment. So you got to be much more careful about any devices and that sort of thing you're using. And the only last con I'll mention with desktop as a service is sometimes you can get some user confusion around having multiple desktops, because remember, again, they're sitting at some computer they're sitting at, and then you're connecting to another computer in the cloud, and it lays down a new desktop. Well, you've got both those desktops there, and the users can either accidentally or intentionally switch back and forth between the two. And for some users, that can cause some confusion. That usually can be resolved with some training and some familiarity, but it's something you need to be prepared for. So our desktop as a service solution has a bunch of benefits. There are some negatives, but it's the only solution for you if you have software that simply isn't cloud native ready. So let's talk about the last possible option, and that's the hybrid approach. And this is really a workaround to try and eliminate some of the cons of whatever method you go with. So maybe you've got 10 pieces of software and 9 of them are cloud native or have web versions, but one doesn't. So you kind of have two options on how you can handle that. One is you could just say, hey, okay, this piece of software isn't quite so critical, or maybe it's only a couple people that need to access it. So you might just leave it on your local network and let that software be used by those users that are in the office. That's something we see get done sometimes. So most of your stuff's in the cloud, in cloud native, but maybe you got a couple things that one or two things that still run locally. The other option is to, in the same model, is to take those things and put just the apps that you need up in desktop as a service. And that's a viable option. And there's some cool things you can do to make that a little cleaner for your users. But there you've got the cloud native for the bulk of your stuff, and then you're using desktop as a service to provide those apps. So there is this kind of combination approach you can use if you need to, and sometimes it's a workaround that can be very effective. So let's talk about what's the best solution. And this is much harder to pin down because it really depends on your software and your goals, right? So for many small businesses, cloud native is the best because it's simple, it's easy. If you can do it, it's probably the easiest and least expensive way to go to the cloud, and certainly gives you a lot of flexibility. If you can't do it, your only option is DaaS. That's the only other option available to you. Desktop as a service, if you have some old app that is not cloud ready, isn't cloud native, the only way to make that work in the cloud is to put it in a DaaS environment. It's desktop as a service environment. And then the other advantage to desktop as a service is that locking down security and not having to worry about local computers. And some people do this, even people that have the ability to go cloud native, all their apps maybe are cloud native, but they still have their users connect through a desktop as a service solution just because they really want to lock down that security piece. We see this often with companies that hire a lot of foreign workers and that sort of thing. But anybody who's really worried about security, desktop as a service can lock it down pretty tight. So again, these are our options. You're going to go one of these two routes or some combination thereof, and it's really a matter of understanding your software and your goals as to see what's right for you. Let's talk about some key things you always need to keep in mind, though. No matter what method you use to go to the cloud, no matter what model you go with, whether it's the cloud native or desktop as a service or hybrid, you're still going to have local network equipment in each office. You're going to have firewalls, switches, Wi-Fi, all those things that make your computers talk and get out on the internet all still have to be there. You're still going to need good security tools that are properly managed. Again, maybe it's different with the tools are different between cloud native and desktop as a service, but they all still have to be there. All that endpoint security and email security and all those other pieces still have to be there. You might even still need a local server for your local network management. If you've got a bunch of computers in an office, you've got a decent sized office with quite a few computers, having a local server there to manage, just to simply manage the computers may be worth the cost because it makes the management that much easier. So it might be a lower end server than what you used to have, probably a less expensive server, but you may still have a server. And ultimately, you still got to manage those local devices, whatever they are. They've got to be configured to connect, at the very least, with a desktop as a service solution. They've got to be configured to connect to that solution. There still has to be some basic security on them. So you never get to eliminate the having to manage those local devices. And I like to throw these things out here because sometimes there's this misconception among people that, oh, I'm going to the cloud, so I don't need to worry about anything anymore. And that's really not how it works. You still have to worry about everything you used to have to worry about. It's just that your stuff's running in a different place. So you gain a lot of flexibility, you gain a lot of benefits, but you really don't gain the benefit of, I don't have to worry about my IT anymore. All that stuff that you still had to worry about is still there, just changes a bit. So it's really important to remember that you're not, you can't just wash your hands of having to deal with IT because you went to the cloud. The last point I'll make in my presentation here is to rely on a qualified IT professional. Now, obviously, we'd love to be that professional for you, but if you have somebody who's working well for you, that's great. Or if you have an internal person or people, fantastic too. Just make sure that they're involved in the planning. Make sure that they're involved in the process of identifying the software and identifying what model you're going to go with and looking at all that data. And especially if you're going to go with a desktop as a service solution, make sure whoever your IT professional is knows the environment you're going to. For instance, if you came to us and said you really wanted to use Amazon Web Services, we would refer you to somebody else. We simply don't have the knowledge and expertise in that. Microsoft Azure, we nail that all day long. So, but even Microsoft Azure, you got to have somebody that knows Azure, and it's going to be a lot easier to find an IT person that knows Azure than AWS. But make sure whatever it is, you're relying on a qualified IT professional. And with that, that's really what I have to talk about as far as migrating to the cloud. I'm happy to answer all your questions. I can stay as long as you want. If you have questions about anything I've talked about, or if you have questions about your environment, you just want some advice, and I'm happy to answer those questions. And I think Anna's going to help me identify if there's anything been put in the
Yeah,
chat and that sort of thing.
we've gotten a few questions so far. So someone asked if moving to the cloud will be sustainable for their small business of 50 employees, and what some of the benefits would be to their company. So I think you went over that a little bit, but maybe you could talk about a business of that size.
Yeah, I think really the bigger you are, almost the more important it is, because downtime for you is a bigger problem, right? Downtime for you is very expensive. And we have a customer recently converted, well, a few years ago, converted. They have multiple offices with 50 people in them, so a couple hundred people altogether, and they were really heavily reliant upon wide area network connections and a lot of locally installed software and huge amounts of servers. And we've successfully now moved them to all cloud-based stuff. And they are they're a combination of using desktop as a service and cloud native. But what they found now, and what I think is so important for a business of any size, is that ability to work from anywhere, right? I mean, if their offices are down, one of their offices are here in Houston. So if a hurricane comes through and wipes out power, they can send those people anywhere. They can work from anywhere in the world and still be able to function at almost 100% capacity. So, even I think the bigger you are, it's almost a stronger argument for that going to the cloud is better, simply because you can stay in business and you can keep your processes running. And the more people you have, the more of a dollar savings that is for you, and more important it is for your clients that you're still there and operating.
Yeah, great. I think we've gotten a couple other questions about what security measures are provided or offered by cloud providers. Do they offer encryption or MFA compliance, things like that?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question, and it varies wildly by the software vendor. So most good web-based software now does provide MFA, and boy, I'm telling you, you should do MFA everywhere, anywhere and everywhere you possibly can. It's always better to do MFA than to not. And frankly, if a web-based software you were looking at didn't provide MFA, that might be a disqualifying factor for it, unless you just no other choice. But so most of them will have some sort of MFA. Most of them will be encrypted. And keep in mind in web traffic, if you look up in your web browser, up at the top of the web browser, the HTTPS thing, on your web browsers, there'll be a little lock symbol up there. And what that means is that's a secure connection. And what the secure connection in the web world means, it's encrypted. So you definitely want to make sure that whatever web-based software you're using supports encryption. I can't remember last time I saw one that didn't now, so it's really become very common. But that's really about all you're going to get from a security standpoint. You're going to get some sort of authentication security like MFA, and you're going to get encryption, and that's about it. The rest of it's all still on you. And it's really important that you still have all the security on your PCs, because if somebody gets access to your PCs while you have a session going with your web software, they have access to that web software just like they would if it was running on your network. So I hope that answers the question on that front.
Yeah, we've got a few more questions. Just really quick,
Okay.
I want to let everyone know that we will be sending out a reporting to everyone who registered. And if you have any further questions for us that are more specific to you that we won't be able to get to in this webinar, you can always go to our website, give us a call, email Steve. His email is on the screen, and we will be happy to follow up with you and talk more about what we can provide and any help we can offer you.
Absolutely. And even if you're just looking for a second opinion on something, I'd be happy to spend a few minutes with you and talk with you as well. So feel free, always available for that.
Oh, and one other thing, we did mention that we will be giving out Uber Eats gift cards to the first 10 registrants and attendees on this webinar. So we will be sending those out to the first 10 registrants that we had through our Zoom portal that attended this webinar today. So be on the lookout if you were an early registrant for an email from us with an Uber Eats gift card. We've gotten
Great.
a few questions about transferring customer data and how to transfer sensitive customer data to the cloud and what the best ways to go about that process are.
Yeah. I mean, excellent question again. Data is one of the real key things that has to be planned out carefully. That's why I talk so much about understanding, how much data you have, where is it, that sort of thing, because that's going to help you determine what cloud file storage system you use. And again, SharePoint's the kind of the de facto one because it's built in. It works really well, and it's built into Microsoft 365, so you have it for free. But if you've got a lot of data or something, it might not work quite as well for you. So, and there are other solutions that work really well in those scenarios. So, again, picking the right cloud solution. But pretty much all of the cloud solutions, when you move your data, they almost all have some tool for migrating. And SharePoint has a really nice migration tool. All the different systems we use another system called Ignite for people that have really large amounts of data. And all of these systems have tools designed to take your data from your local computers or your file server and migrate it into the cloud system. And all of those tools that I've ever encountered have encryption by default. And that's really the key, is you want to make sure that however that data is being copied to the cloud file system, that it's being copied, that what we talk about is encryption at rest and in transit. So wherever your data is stored needs to be encrypted, but it also needs to be encrypted as it's crossing the internet. So when you're moving it from one location to another, it should be encrypted. All of the tools we use, and I think most of the tools, I can't remember the last time I saw a data transfer tool that didn't have the ability to encrypt data in transit, but you absolutely want to ask that question and make sure that that's the case.
We also got some questions about the cost implications of cloud migration and ongoing maintenance of cloud migration.
Yeah, so a lot of this really depends on how complex so the cost of the migration. Let's talk about the cost of the migration first, and we'll talk about cost of just supporting it. The migration itself, anybody like us or any other company is going to take a look at what you've got, make some estimate on how many hours we think it's going to be, and then give you either an estimate or a fixed dollar amount based on that. It's really not that much different than putting a new server in. So if you're running servers in-house and you've put new servers in, you have to migrate from one server to the other. You got to move all that data from one server to another. The process really isn't that much different. The copies can take a little longer, especially if you have large amounts of data. It can take a couple of days or a few days sometimes to copy terabytes of data from a local network into the cloud. Whereas server to server, it might run a little faster. But generally speaking, it's really comparable to putting a new server in, which is to be fair, it's a significant operation. a lot of it depends on how much cleanup has to be done on the data. So one of the big things is like if you had a file server with data shared folders all over it, and you had really long path names, really long file names, and long folder names. There are limits to how long, like SharePoint or any other on cloud file system, how long the full path can be for files, and all of them have, like, there's a tool we would always run first off to see, okay, are your file paths too long? So if there's a lot of cleanup that has to be done, that adds time to it. So, we're really talking about, you're probably talking a good few $1,000s, probably, depending on your size, maybe quite a few $1,000s if you're larger or have really large data sets. Maybe only $1,000 or so if you're pretty small and don't have that much. So it really varies depending on how long. And setting up a desktop as a service environment rather than going cloud native is probably more significantly expensive as well. You've got to configure that whole Azure environment. There's actually a lot of complication to Azure. I mean, from the end user standpoint, it's very simple, but from a network design standpoint, there's a lot involved there. So it does add time. If going cloud native is much easier, just transferring your file data is really the only thing that has to be transferred at that point. In a desktop as a server situation, we got to not only move that data, but we got to configure the whole environment. It's like configuring a network from scratch. So definitely a desktop as a service environment is more expensive. So it can vary wildly depending on what your needs are. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question before the end of the session. And then if anyone has any more questions, you can always follow up with us after the fact. Like I said, you can reach out to us at any point in time. Contact information is on the screen. So for our last question, I think there's two that I can kind of merge into one here.
Okay.
What are the best ways to handle unexpected downtime that might occur during a migration process? And how do you migrate like a legacy on-site software without any major disruptions?
Yeah. So this is really large. I mean, the excellent question again. It's kind of the magic trick of people like us on how we handle this. And what we do is we do a pre-migration and a go live migration. And this is all planned out pretty heavily. Again, it varies very much depending on how much data you have, how it's structured, how much cleanup has to be done, and apps and that sort of thing too. And it works the same way with apps and data. So if you've got apps and we're putting that in a desktop as a service environment in Azure or something like that, we'll migrate it all as of some point in time, and then we'll do a go live migration. So it makes the go live piece much faster because we've already moved most of it. So we can only move things that are changed at that point. And we try to schedule that so that it falls, we'll try and schedule those things for late in the afternoon on a Friday or kind of thing or something. So, if there's a problem, we have time to clean it up and we have a couple of days to be able to go through it. But it really depends on how long it's going to take for the file transfer to go. But again, doing that pre-migration and then go live migration makes it go much faster on the go live. And the nice thing about the pre-migration is when you pre-migrate, you can go test it and everything. So what we'll do is we'll pre-migrate somebody. And this is whether you're going to just a cloud hosted system in cloud native or whether you're doing desktop as a service. We'll set the whole thing up and then we'll have you go and test it. Before we actually do your go live, your users are all still working in your old system. We're going to have you go in there and make sure everything's running and give you an opportunity to look at it. Yep, data looks like it's there. Everything looks like it's there. Everything seems to be working fine. Printers are working, all that kind of stuff. So we'll have time for you to test all that. And then we schedule the go live and we just copy the last bit over. So we work really hard to minimize that downtime. And usually it's very rare that we can't get it done over a weekend or even if on a smaller system overnight in many cases. So it's rare that we have a lot of excess downtime. There will always be, just like in any kind of migration, there will always be a little bit of cleanup, miscellaneous stuff. That quirky little stuff that didn't get identified in the testing. So we'll have a higher volume of your users, hey, this isn't working, or hey, I'm having this problem. But most of that should be relatively minor stuff and be cleaned up pretty well within a week or two as it gets identified. But for just overall real downtime, you should be able to minimize that pretty heavily based on doing a pre-migration and then a live migration and making sure that the more you test it, the better the results are going to be, right? And sometimes we'll set up that pre-migration and our customers go in there and they do look at a couple things, but they don't really test it that much. And you're going to have more problems when we do the live one, where when your users start hitting it, there's going to be more. So the better you do on the testing in that in that pre-migration phase, the less inconvenience it's going to be for your users when you ultimately do it. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for attending the webinar today. We've gone a little bit over time. Like I said before, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to provide more information about cloud migrations and talk more specifically about your situation and your business. Like I said before, we will be sending out the Uber Eats gift cards to the first 10 registrants and attendees, so be on the lookout for that. If you were an early registrant, we will get that out to you. Other than that, thank you all for attending and have a great day. And
Thank you
we will
very
be
much,
sending the
everyone.
recording out as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.